Okay, let's keep the camp buzz going because this is what's becoming a very interesting quarterback battle at one of the most important programs in the entire country. Because when we were going into fall camp, Michigan coach Jim Harbaugh said on an athletic department podcast, he was like, normally with these battles by the 8th or 9th practice, we like to see something separate. That's about when you want to have your starter be able to hand him the keys to the offense and pull away. Cade McNamara, obviously the incumbent, JJ McCarthy, the challenger. JJ McCarthy played a good bit last year. Tom, well documented, he thinks that McCarthy is the guy. Late last week, now that we're about 12 practices in for Michigan, he said, Jim, you're in the back half of camp now. Has there been any separation at quarterback? To which Jim Harbaugh, and I'll paraphrase here, is complimenting both of them. Says they're both elevating their game on a daily basis. It's pretty tight. They're both playing high starter caliber, and indicated that this might be a competition that stretches all the way into the regular season. Do you think that we are dealing with more trying to maintain your depth? Do you think that we are looking at a scenario where it truly is difficult to call, or is this a motivational tactic? What do you think ends up coming out from what we are getting in terms of some of the buzz from Ann Arbor?
I think it's possible depth just to make sure everybody's happy and sticking around. But I think that's possible. But I think it's more likely is Harbaugh's just being honest, because last year, he didn't hide it. He named McNamara the starter pretty early in the competition and said he was pretty open about McNamara was ahead of McCarthy. So he's kind of changing his tune this year, which causes me to think that the battle between them is legit. And I also think if you're Michigan and you look at their non-conference schedule, which is pretty soft, it's like Colorado State, Hawaii, and somebody else who I cannot remember off the top of my head. It is UConn.
Yeah.
You can go into the season and maybe McNamara is the first person to take snaps, but like we saw, last year, McCarthy got plenty of snaps. You could go into your non-conference schedule with the idea that you're probably going to win those 3 games, and you can use those 3 games somewhat as more practice, more of a way to determine, instead of doing it against the same players they've been seeing in camp all spring and all summer, seeing them live against opponents that they aren't familiar with and seeing how they perform in those environments. Because I think he's got 2 good options. I'm not surprised if they're both playing well enough where either one's not truly separating from the other. But I also think that just based on my history of following Jim Harbaugh teams, both at college and the NFL, Cade is always going to have a chance simply because he does not do stupid stuff. And I think that Jim Harbaugh really appreciates quarterbacks who don't turn the ball over, and they might not be the best, most talented player on his roster, but they're not putting his team in bad situations. And I think Cade McNamara is a good quarterback who doesn't put his team in bad situations. And as I've got over many times, I think JJ McCarthy has the much higher ceiling, but maybe he just doesn't have that kind of trust in him yet. Maybe he wants to see him in those games against Colorado State, Hawaii, and UConn, and be like, if McCarthy plays well and he takes care of the football, maybe by the time they play their Big Ten opener, McCarthy is the predominant starter.
Tom, one of the cover 3 experts that are in on the lock unity for the Michigan over 9.5. What do you think? At Iowa, does the decision even need to be made by then? Maryland is the first home game. You mentioned the non-conference schedule. Maryland is the first conference game. That game is at home. They are at Iowa on October 1st. That also is when we start to get past the 4-game redshirt sort of moment. If somebody were to try to transfer, you think that we see one of those quarterbacks pull away before then?
I think ideally you want to have your starter before you go on the road to Iowa. You don't want to be going to Kinnick in that situation, kind of playing, yo-yo with your QB, sending one in and sending one out, because it's just a tough environment to play in to begin with. So you'd like to have, for that entire week of prep for that game, you'd like to have somebody who knows I'm the guy. This is my game.
And this should be a very, very, very good offense with either quarterback. I would say is probably the other part of this, which is just an amazing place for Michigan to be. When we try to think about the evolution of the Michigan offense under Jim Harbaugh, they dealt with injuries last year and still were able to make it all the way to the college football playoff. If that group stays healthy, that could be one of the best offenses in the Big Ten. Obviously, Ohio State is the pace setter there, but take those 2 teams. We're also probably talking about 2 of the top 5-10 offenses in the entire country.
Yeah, and it's funny too, because once Michigan got crushed by Georgia in the playoff, the talk was, see, their offense isn't any good, because Georgia All the other offenses were just having great days against Georgia all season last year.
There was one. It wasn't even an offense. There was one man who had one good game against that Georgia defense, and it basically won him the Heisman Trophy with what Bryce Young was able to do.